Finovate showcases cutting-edge banking and financial technology through a global conference series featuring short-form demos and thought leadership. Now, the conversation continues on the Finovate podcast.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Finovate podcast. We've got a fun one for you today. Joining me, we have Rita Martins, author of Web3 in Financial Services and ex-head of FinTech Partnerships at HSBC. Rita, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Greg. Good to be here.
So obviously, we're going to talk about the new book that you have coming out, Web3 in Financial Services. But before we get there, can you give us a little bit of background on yourself and kind of what led you to write the book?
For sure. So I come from a traditional background. So like you mentioned in introduction, I used to work at HSBC. And prior to that, I work in consulting. And so I have always looked into new technologies and how they drive disruption or innovation within financial services. And so when I was at the bank, I looked into this space and I found it super fascinating. I really believe that it has a big potential to change finance. But I also see that when you go into the news, you only see some of the best parts of it. So you only hear about the FTX collapse or some of the bad actors. And I really thought there was missing some book who would explain really some of the key use cases and some of the impact that this technology could have on financial services. Many of the leaders within finance, they're super busy, so it's hard for them to really understand or even know some of these new technologies. So I wanted to create a book which is super simple and super easy for anyone who works in a traditional finance company who wants to learn a bit more about this space.
Yeah, and I think it's a very timely book for sure. Certainly something that's on a lot of people's minds. Before we get too far, I just want to get some terminology set. So I think most of our listeners will have heard of Web3, but how would you define that term, having researched it a little bit more than most?
So I define Web3 as the ecosystem of companies who are using blockchain technology for new innovation, and they're trying to balance decentralization, data ownership, and openness. As you can see in the book, some of those companies include DeFi companies, so decentralized finance, new startups, but also you have traditional big banks, for example, who are also driving some of that change.
Sure, sure. So, so far this has been the easiest interview ever for me because I'm just basically reading off the table of contents. But let's go to the second chapter. Why does Web3 matter to financial services providers?
So Web3 or blockchain is really already disrupting finance, and it's really important for leaders within traditional finance to understand some of this space. Otherwise, they can really be disrupted by some of the new players that they are coming through.
Cool. So, I think let's kind of approach it from the other side too. What are some of the potential pitfalls for companies who don't engage with with Web3 right now? Are there some sticks out there that are waiting to come up and hit people if they don't learn about the space and get into it quickly?
Yeah, for sure. And the reality is that, I mean, some companies are going to decide to not actually engage into it because it's not their priority right now. The only problem that they will have is that when big companies start really engaging it and you're going to see some of the innovations, they might take too long to catch up. So one example that I like to give is, for example, BlackRock. BlackRock CEO really sees the benefit of tokenization, and they have started really acting on that. Now, that will really push some of the innovation within this space just because of the importance that BlackRock has. If we think about some of the incumbents or big organizations who are typically slower to innovate, who are typically slower to just drive projects internally, they might be losing out if BlackRock and other similar companies really drive innovation within this space, just because those companies who are not ready to go for it, it's going to take them too long to even understand some of this technology because it's such a new technology, but also to even just get the house in order, let's say, to really start driving some of the innovation.
Yeah, so let's talk about it from the other side because, I mean, obviously, anytime there's this kind of disruption, there are some painful moments to it. There's some things you have to be careful to avoid, but also it brings a lot of new opportunities. What would you say are some of the biggest new opportunities that Web3 is bringing to the financial services community?
So there are a number of opportunities. One of them is cost reduction or efficiencies. A good example is how some companies are using stablecoins for remittances. So, for example, in emerging markets, you have individuals who go and work abroad and then they want to send money to their families in other countries. And so by using stable coins, it's not only faster, but also cheaper for the companies and for the clients to do it. The other one is new revenue streams. So an easy example that everyone hopefully have heard about is the Bitcoin ETFs. And that's really just a new asset class and it's just a new revenue that some of the companies are getting. And the final one will be around innovation. So a good example here is, for example, tokenization of assets. And really, the innovation here will be when you start using those tokenized assets for the solutions. One example is using some of the tokenized assets for collateral for some of the loans. So we'll see a lot of new innovation within this space, and there will be a lot of new revenue streams and new clients that some companies can get.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot potentially to play for. So what do firms need to be doing right now to have the best chance of harvesting some of those opportunities, other than, of course, buying and reading your book?
Mhm. For sure. So the first one is really education. So understanding some of the fundamentals of Web3. And then they also need to define their strategy. So what role do they want to play within Web3? One example is the CEO of DBS. He doesn't believe in the utopia of DeFi. Instead, he believes that blockchain will power the back office. And that's how they really then go and action on that strategy. So for any companies or leaders who are thinking, how do I get ready for Web3? It's really defining their strategy and then acting on it. So, do they want to build internally? Do they want to buy companies? Or do they even want to partner up with some of the other startups who are driving already some innovation within this space? The final one will be really around engaging with some of the regulatory bodies because especially within Web3, the frameworks are still changing depending on where companies are based. So it's really important to have that engagement and that conversation as soon as possible.
Yeah, on that regulatory piece, because I think that's when we first heard about blockchain, when it first was coming on to the scene, around 2016, 2017, a lot of people were initially looking at it as a massive tool for regulators and compliance officers. And right now, we're obviously seeing a lot of those types of communities, the regulatory compliance side, having really big effects on the markets across geographies, certainly in the US and the UK and Europe as well. Um, what are you seeing in terms of the compliance angle here? Does Web3, is it sort of a natural benefit to compliance officers, or is it kind of just a new potentially scary thing that they have to be aware of?
No, so there is definitely benefits for compliance officers that there are some really interesting tools that compliance officers and even compliance teams within traditional finance that can use to understand this space. It it's very interesting because it's very different depending on where you are globally. So within Europe, for example, we have MiCA regulation coming forward, and you can see that the some of the different regulatory bodies they already start learning about this space. They start getting much more confident, and so they started with what they know, m- closer to what they know, and then they're going to be moving into bigger innovations like DeFi, for example, at a later stage. While in the US, as we know, it's a slightly different approach, let's say, to this space. But I think there is definitely like an opportunity for both bodies, but also teams across the globe to really use this to really track some of the innovation that is happening.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. I think this is, again, we're still at the beginning of this journey, so we'll see where it all comes from. But A lot of exciting stuff to keep an eye on there. So zooming out, looking at this from kind of the entire financial services ecosystem, and fintech ecosystem is kind of a part of that. Well, who do you think has the most to gain as we get further down this Web3 pathway? And by who I mean, I'm talking kind of in terms of established incumbents, innovative fintechs, challenger banks. Who really stands to benefit?
So it's an interesting question. All of them could really benefit from it. I would say probably the innovative fintechs or the nimble startups could probably benefit even more because they can much more quickly and really embrace this technology in a faster way. And so if they really start doing it now, they will be able to disrupt and gain some of the market that they didn't have before. It's interesting because right now, as we just discussing, there are a few companies that are being acquired, and you can really see that they have gained a lot because they have started since the beginning. They were small, they were nimble, they really started with some of the solutions, and now they are growing in a way that they either gonna go and do IPOs or they're gonna be acquired by other companies. So you can see already some of those companies who were smaller and nimble and really innovative within this space start gaining some of the market that they didn't have before.
I think that nimbleness is going to be key, right? The ability to move quickly, to respond quickly is going to be something that obviously will give some of those smaller companies a little bit of an advantage. But let's take the other side. Who really has the most to lose here as we get further down that Web3 journey?
Yeah, so like we discussing earlier, I think any incumbents, big organizations that do not understand this space or do not know what role they want to play will probably have the more to lose because they are just losing an opportunity to provide new revenue streams and to provide new user experiences. Clients will go and try some of the new companies, and that could be a bigger problem as some of the innovation within Web3 keeps growing and they are not part of it.
Yeah, you actually bring up an interesting one there, talking about kind of the clients, the end customers. Where do they fit into this journey? I mean, do you think that most people, kind of the end users, are going to be able to understand and trust Web3, or will there be a period of people kind of needing to figure it out, needing to understand what benefits it brings before they start kind of going and asking their financial services providers, "Hey, why aren't you giving me this?" Because I think this is, we've seen this before when it comes to fintech adoption. In many cases, getting that kind of consumer trust piece of it is sometimes the most challenging. How do you think that will shake out as more consumers become aware of what Web3 can do for them?
So it's interesting. For the book, I interviewed a few different people from companies, and I can tell you that most of the companies from the bigger companies, the traditional finance companies, they started getting within this space because their institutional clients have started asking them to have access to Bitcoin, for example. So I think within the institutional client space, that's already happening. And that's why you will see solutions like custody, for example, for institutional clients. You'll see the Bitcoins, ETFs, and so on. And they started because the clients are asking for it. Within the retail side, you already see some of the retail customers really just buying some small cryptocurrencies. And that's what they do right now. I think as this space increases, they will be start asking for more. But also I think the most important thing is that for them, they would not even know if they're using blockchain or if they're using something else. The same way that, to be honest, most of them don't know if their bank is using cloud or if it's on perm solutions. And so this is one of the key changes that we're going to see as we reach this mass adoption is that it doesn't really matter for the clients what is the technology that we're using for some of the solutions, as long as it's super simple, it's super easy, it brings convenience and it brings something new, similar to what we saw with fintech as well.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. At the end of the day, clients don't necessarily need to care or understand what's happening behind the scenes as long as the service is doing what they want it to do. So let's end on a fun one. Obviously, you spent a lot of time looking into various aspects of Web3 for your book. What was one of the most surprising things that you learned as you were doing that research?
So one surprising or even interesting thing that I found was really the breadth of experience and talents within the DeFi space, this centralized finance space. I think when you see sometimes some of the news and you think about DeFi, we all think, or at least I thought about really these innovative people who come from these movements of disrupting finance, disrupting central banks, disrupting some of the social norms. However, when I start researching into it and start meeting more and more people, I actually found a breadth of different experiences and different backgrounds. I saw a lot of people who were coming from a traditional finance background who really had built and developed solutions within finance, but they were excited about some of the innovation that was happening within this space. But I also saw some of these innovative and new ideas of people who never worked within finance, but also because of that as well, they had a different way of thinking about it and they were creating very interesting innovation. And some of these solutions, they are live, especially within emerging markets. There are many people using some of these solutions. And even though you might not hear about them every day, they are live and they're really being used by real people.
Well, that's fascinating. So we're going to end the interview here. Again, the book is called Web3 in Financial Services. I've been chatting with Rita Martins, the author of that book. It's a very interesting space. I would encourage everybody who's listening to this to learn more. You have an option about whether you want to learn more for now, but I think long term, you don't really. You'll need to know about this. Rita, thank you again for joining me. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
The Finovate podcast is produced by Informa Connect in association with Provoke.fm Media. Check out Finovate.com for information on Finovate's upcoming shows and to learn how you can get involved. The discount code Finovate Podcast will save you 20% on tickets to all of our events. And you can email us at info@finovate.com for information on sponsoring, speaking, or demoing. Thanks for listening.